A letter, written in his own hand, telling her mother everything was fine. Money had been arranged, a car already paid off, a house signed over in her name. On paper, it read like generosity, like a man closing a chapter with dignity. In reality, the woman who supposedly wrote those words was chained inside a house at that very moment, and the man dictating the letter had already stockpiled enough food to keep her there for years. This is not the story of a man who snapped. This is the story of a man who refused, from the very beginning, to accept that something had ended. Before going further, a note on how this case should be understood. Ailton Rodriguez de Sousa has been arrested and formally charged, but he has not yet stood trial. Everything described here comes from statements made by Brazilian police and reported by Brazilian media, along with public statements the alleged victim herself has since shared. What follows in terms of psychological framing is a pattern analysis of reported conduct offered for context rather than a clinical diagnosis of the man himself. He remains entitled to the presumption of innocence until a court decides otherwise. The timeline begins on a Monday, August 17. Emiliane Tamara Nunes Calvajo, a 24-year-old nursing technician, left a clinic in Aguas Lindas de Goiás, a city near Brazil's Federal District, and simply never made it home. Her family reported her missing that same day. 5 days passed with apparently no leads. Then, on Friday, August 21, a specialized unit of the military police of Goiás stopped a man walking on the street, someone who, as it turned out, had also been reported missing since that Tuesday. Emiliane's ex-husband, Ailton Rodriguez de Sousa. He tried to run. He resisted when officers moved to detain him. And from that single encounter, investigators began tracing addresses connected to his name, eventually arriving at a house in the America 3 neighborhood. Inside they could hear something, sounds that shouldn't have been coming from an apparently empty home. When officers went in, they found Emiliane restrained with handcuffs, rope, and an iron chain, a gag covering her mouth and a mask over her face, reportedly so that neighbors would never hear her if she screamed. According to police, she was struggling to breathe and showed visible signs of violence. She was rushed to the municipal hospital of Aguas Lindas de Goiás, and doctors listed her condition as stable. What Emiliane has since described publicly on social media adds another layer of horror to an already devastating case. She has said she was repeatedly raped during her captivity. She has said Ailton gave her water laced with clonazepam, and that he would free her hands only once every day or two, just long enough for her to eat before binding her again. In his own statement to police, he admitted to drugging her with antidepressants. Alongside Emiliane, officers recovered a 9mm pistol inside the house, and they found a letter, written in her handwriting, addressed to her mother, apparently composed under his direction. In it, she asked her family not to call the police. She referenced 50,000 reais, a car already paid off, and a deed to a house placed in her name. One line from that letter has since become central to how investigators understand this case. A promise that Ailton would leave behind somewhere between 30 and 50,000 reais so that the children could get by. What makes this case so unsettling isn't only the violence itself, and unfortunately, cases involving violence like this are far from rare. What stands out here is the architecture behind the control, a structure that lines up with uncomfortable precision across 3 separate traits often grouped together as the dark triad. Start with narcissism. Despite his denial that the relationship had actually ended, police confirmed a documented history of domestic violence between the two of them well before this abduction. That detail matters because it reframes everything that followed. This wasn't a single explosive moment, it was one more chapter in a much longer pattern. During her captivity, Emiliane says he kept insisting they get back together and told her he had already stored enough supplies to keep them both in that house for years, if that's what it took. That single sentence captures the narcissistic core of the entire case. A former partner isn't treated as a person with the right to leave a relationship. She's treated as an extension of his own will, something that simply cannot separate from him without his permission. The end of a relationship, in this mindset, isn't experienced as a loss to grief. It's experienced as an insult that demands correction, by force if necessary. Then there's the manipulation, and the letter is where it shows most clearly. That letter to her mother may be the single most revealing piece of evidence in the entire file. It wasn't a careless mistake. It was a calculated, second-layer manipulation, using the victim's own handwriting and voice, the one thing capable of reassuring a worried family, to buy the captor more time. The financial specifics woven into it, the car, the house, money set aside for the children, all point toward a narrative rehearsed in advance, built to project calm and generosity to the outside world, while something entirely different was happening behind closed doors. Finally, there's the psychopathy, visible mainly in the sheer logistics involved. Premeditation is what separates this from a crime of sudden passion. A separate house, isolated, already equipped with chains, rope, and a mask meant to muffle her voice so no neighbor would hear. Sedatives measured out with what looks like calculated precision. Her hands freed only briefly, only often enough to keep her alive, and food stockpiled with the explicit goal of sustaining a confinement that could last years. None of that reads as improvised. It reads as logistics, the kind of cold, methodical planning that defines this particular corner of the dark triad far more than any impulsive outburst ever could. Legally, the case remains open, and investigators still haven't confirmed an exact motive behind the abduction itself, beyond the broader pattern already described. The matter continues under investigation by the civil police of Goiás. At the time of the earliest press coverage, the defense had yet to be located for comment, and courts have already denied a request for provisional release, ruling that the available precautionary alternatives simply weren't sufficient given the severity of what's alleged here. As for Emiliane, she has since been discharged from the hospital. She's posted messages online thanking everyone whose efforts helped locate her, while also explaining that she's still dealing with lasting damage to her eyes from the ordeal. It's worth repeating, this is above everything else a human story still unfolding, not a piece of close case entertainment. The pattern analysis offered here exists to help make sense of how this kind of control operates, not to speculate about the private suffering of a survivor. Emiliane survived. She had the strength to endure it, and the good fortune that someone knocked on that door in time. But the question this case leaves behind isn't really about her at all. It's about him, and about how a man can move from saying I love you to deciding he'd rather cage someone for years than simply let her go, all while still somehow seeing himself as the victim of his own story. Because that's one of the most consistent patterns across cases like this one. The person holding all the control rarely sees himself that way. He experiences himself as the one who got abandoned, the one who got betrayed, the one who only ever wanted to fix things, and just never got the chance to be understood. So here's the question worth sitting with after watching this. How many warning signs like this are already hiding inside relationships that look, from the outside, completely normal? Control dressed up as devotion. I can't live without you, which sometimes really means something closer to a threat. You're not going to live without me. It's a pattern that can go unnoticed for years, right up until it's too late. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you in the next case.